We figured that this bird had flown over 100,000 kilometers in its life. And the thing about it is we saw it intermediately in between.
First of all, what's the circumference of the Earth?
Yeah.
Yep.
It's like, what is it? I don't even know what it is, but it's not that.
No, it's flown around the Earth a couple times. Like, yeah.
Hey guys, what's happening? Welcome to Your Forest. I'm Matthew Kristoff, as usual. And today I've got a great podcast. I know I always say that, but I think they're all great. I wouldn't put them out if I didn't think they were. So, but this one is actually the longest one I've ever done. It is really interesting though. So I brought on Patti Campsall and Richard Krikun. So Patti Campsall is a forester and the executive director for the Boreal Center for Bird Conservation up north of Slave Lake. And Richard Krikun is a wildlife biologist and also was the lead bander for the Slave Lake area. And so the Boreal Center for Bird Conservation is a new building. It's a green building, and we talk a little bit about that. And it's all about forest education and creating forest values for the public. And it's a really cool spot. I advise anybody that's ever been in the area to check it out. Really cool. They always have cool things going on for the public to check out. And they're also associated with the bird banding facility, which is nearby, and that's where Richard works. And so if you don't know what bird banding is, basically it's one small part of the bird management toolkit, right? So they basically have a location on the north end of Slave Lake where they are counting all of the birds that are coming through, and some of them that they capture, they put a little band on them to identify them so they know where they're going in the world. And but most of them, they're just hearing them and seeing them, and they're keeping tabs on everything so that we can keep tabs on bird management and their population numbers and that kind of stuff, right? And really, really cool stuff. We got really detailed into how they do that, those measurements. And we talked a lot about the BCBC as well. Really cool spot, and really unique building too. Really, that's actually where we did it. So I shouldn't say I brought them on. I say they brought me on. I actually went to them. We did it in the Boreal Center for Bird Conservation, and it was great. I really, really enjoyed it. I hope you guys like it too. I'm skipping sponsors today because it's a long podcast. So if you don't listen to the whole thing, I would advise listening to it maybe in 2 chunks if you don't have time. You know what I mean? Just split it up. The ending, we really got into kind of philosophically where industry should be with regards to management of these bird species, and kind of it got a little bit more philosophical, less about the strict science, but it was interesting. It was really, really good, and I was happy to get Richard and Patty's viewpoints on all that kind of stuff. So I would have them both on again anytime. I don't think they were done talking. They had so much more to say, but an hour and 40 minutes is a long time. So without any further messing around, let's jump straight into it. Here we go. I thought we'd just start off talking about the BCBC itself, so where we are and like how this all came to be, right? So I don't know who wants to start. Maybe Patti, you want to get going?
Sure.
It's your baby, right?
Yeah. Well, I inherited the baby. I'll put it that way. It's definitely the baby of the LSLBO board. So the Boreal Center was basically opened up in 2006, and it's a partnership between Alberta Parks and the Lesser Slave Lake Bird Observatory. And so the Bird Observatory, we've been operating in the park here since 1994, but we always had this dream of having an education and research center, the ability to connect with people outside of the banding lab. And so we worked hard with parks, and this was definitely the baby or the vision for a lot of key people in our organization.
Yeah.
It's an education and research center. So, and as well, it's also a visitor center for the park. So it wears lots of hats. In the summer, it's sort of the tourist highlight for visiting people coming up to the park. So we get lots of kids of all ages and adults and birders and seniors, you name it, come through. There's an exhibit gallery that we're sitting in right now that they can check out. And it's all about the importance of the boreal forest, and especially for birds is sort of the theme.
Right.
But then the rest of the year, we do school programming, community outreach, big big education component. And then probably most importantly for us, it's the home for the Lesser Slave Lake Bird Observatory. So this is where we our staff are for our different monitoring programs that Rich will talk about. And then as well, a lot of collaborative research happens here.
I think I want to take a picture of actually where we're sitting. I got to find a good camera just because this is like a cool,
it is.
Besides I did a podcast at the top of one of the mountains overlooking Brule Lake. Besides that location, this might be the second coolest spot, actually. It's the most representative, I think.
Well, it's pretty cool to work in a place when people come in and they go, I can't believe you work here. It just got a really nice feel. It's really...
and there's like open windows everywhere and just like you feel like you're still in the bush, right?
It's got a really innovative design, and that's partly why we have such huge windows, is because we wanted to minimize our environmental footprint as an environmental organization. And Alberta Parks, you need to walk the talk.
Yeah, for sure.
So from the very beginning, they wanted to basically do an environmentally friendly building. So the Boreal Center is actually a gold building for LEEDs. It's got a water conservation theme. So it was designed originally to collect rainwater and snow melt off the roof. It has composting toilets. I joke that the water used for this center is essentially the coffee that we made before our podcast here and washing your hands. That's basically what the building uses for water. It's got an energy conservation theme. So it's geothermal heating and cooling. We've got solar panels that help offset our use. Big windows, so we don't usually have to turn lights on. It's just a really cool building.
No, it's awesome. Well, I had I don't know if you know Shafraz Kaba. He was with the group that helped architect this building, I guess, right? And I brought him on talking about sustainable buildings and all that kind of stuff. And it was cool to find out that he was involved in this too. But it's like the funny thing though, when you hear the like compostable toilets, you go like, so how does that stench work out, right? Like you expect that it's going to be this nasty, but you can't. There's nothing, right?
There's no smell anywhere. And actually, I joke that that's actually the cool factor about the building. When people leave, that's the part that they remember because it doesn't smell. And
for some weird reason, right? Like
they had to upgrade the system because the original system, it was a little bit smaller, but it also had a draft that sort of blew up. And so going to the washroom was actually kind of refreshing. You're like, ooh, actually right in the right spots.
That's awesome.
Yeah. The original composting toilets, when they first built the building, I think the people didn't have a vision of just how popular and sort of where this building was going to go.
Yeah.
So they literally had these composting toilets that were like cottages for cottages. So you can imagine you get a special event or a bunch of grade ones that all have to use the bathroom 3 times, and it was not good.
Right.
It was like the whole Super Bowl thing. Like it doesn't get used like for 10 months and then for 2 months. Like, I meant Super Bowl commercial time when everybody has to go pee at the same time. Yeah. So suddenly there's this low. Anyway.
Yeah. There's a big load on the system all at once. For sure. That's why there's 3 of us, right? I make a brain fart, you fix it.
So probably about 5 years ago, they actually upgraded. So now we have big commercial composting toilets. And I have to commend Alberta Parks because they could have totally just put low flow toilets in and said, hey, we're still being green. But they actually did keep with that composting toilet theme. And so
well, and the like, because it technically, what you said it was a gold standard for LEEDs. What does that mean? Because it's like a net zero something, right?
What it is it's a voluntary green building certification that you can go for. Leadership in energy and environmental design, off the top of my head. I'll have to double check that.
It's a good thing.
It's a good thing. So essentially, and there's credits that you can have, and the more credits you have, the higher level. So you can be silver, gold, platinum.
Oh, platinum. So you're not the top.
No,
that always screws me up when they go, I'm a gold standard. Like, but is diamond or like what's the deal?
So platinum's the top. So it was originally designed for silver standard, and we actually eked out enough points that we got gold.
Nice.
At gold, it still made economic sense. So you run out the cost of the building for 20 years, and it's obviously more investment to be green,
right.
But over the long term,
it pays for itself.
You're going to pay for itself.
Yeah.
Platinum is. At that point, you're doing it for the greater good.
Right.
You know you're never going to recoup your money on it at all.
Okay. It's completely
it's so green. It's
Right. So this one, because is this one hooked up to the power grid at all, or is it just
it is? So actually, geothermal does use more electricity than a conventional furnace because furnaces cycle off and on. Geothermal, the pumps are constantly going.
Right.
So it will use more electricity. Originally, there was a program where you could pay extra and you basically for green power, but it does use more electricity. But the idea is that it's using geothermal, which is a renewable energy source. So it doesn't use any natural gas, propane, that type of thing. And then the solar panels that are outside in front of the building.
They're huge, by the way.
They are. And they're actually connected to the Nest, which is a comfort camping, basically a cabin you can rent through Alberta parks. Mm-hmm. And those panels essentially offset the electrical use of that building. They're tied into the grid. And it's basically like a little power generation station.
Yeah.
And over a year, it essentially is carbon neutral. It generates what it uses.
Right. So. And that's the net zero idea, right? Is that like you still hooked up to the system a little bit because it does become minus 30 here sometimes.
Yes.
So and you're right up against the lake, so you got that harsh
and
wind.
the building will kick into, like, if it is minus 30 and the geothermal just isn't cutting it, it will kick in, just run off electricity.
Yeah, but exactly, it has to be economically feasible. Otherwise, like Alberta Parks isn't going to kick in like a couple extra million just for like this building to be environmentally ethical, right? Like, for sure. So then, because before this, you just had the bird banding facility, right?
Yes,
that was all of this. So, and I remember growing up, and it was just like a little.
Oh, it's this little shack.
Yeah, it's not even a cabin; it's a shack.
Yeah,
and you guys weren't staying there though.
No. I think it was really, there were some bunk beds set up in it.
Yeah.
So you could stay if you wanted to, and maybe back in the day before I arrived, maybe they did, because there was this really scuzzy foamy on one of them. But I mean, there wasn't heating or anything like that. It was.
There's no wood stove in there either. Right?
No,
It was just the walls.
Just walls. Yeah. I think somebody brought in a propane tank with a little screw-on heater.
Oh yeah. Propane indoors is always a good idea.
Oh yeah, I used it
never
twice.
Used it.
Yeah, and and then it decided to rot out, and we got a replacement building, a new building. 3 or 4 years ago now. Yeah. And which is really neat because a lot of that effort to get that new building in was done by volunteers. So we had the carpentry class from Northern Lakes College build the thing. We got most of the materials donated.
Yeah.
Nice.
We got donated the people to bring it out because it was built at the college and then driven out here, hauled out, and that was donated, the time for that.
Nice.
So I don't know. I think like 9% of it was by donation. I can't remember.
Something 85%.
Yeah, it was great
in terms of the cost of the materials and labor.
That's sweet.
Yeah, and it's really nice. I was hesitant because I love that old lab. It was
he doesn't
so
like
good.
Change.
I don't like change. Change is hard, but Patty's husband or partner, he built this fantastic deck. So I remember this, like, because the deck.
Luckily, he's
built,
a carpenter.
Yeah,
he's jack of all trades. He does everything. John's amazing. Because he built that up last fall.
Yeah.
So 2 falls ago. So this last year, when I arrived, sorry if I say last year, I meant the year before, but my time is all weird. But my last spring working at here, I arrived and there was like to set up the observatory for the season, and we just had this huge dump of snow, and I walk out there's this little building with this gorgeous, and I just sat out there for a long time just drinking coffee and 2 feet of snow because I'm like, well, what else are you gonna do?
Yeah.
It was amazing.
No, it's awesome. And where's the new one? Because the old one was like a ways away, right?
Yeah, no, it's in the same spot.
Oh, it's in the same spot.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's that thing, there's a lot of confusion because people actually call the observatory the Boreal Center.
Right. It's not.
Well, no, it's not the same
Two
thing.
different places.
It's 2 different places. Like, we're associated with the Boreal Center, but we're actually independent from them, if you will. It's just a couple kilometers up the highway towards the park. I mean, towards the campground.
Right.
And, the new building, like, it's in the exact same spot as the old one.
Nice.
And it's kind of nice to have it a little bit removed from this building, because I know during the design of the building there was a lot of talk about doing banding demonstrations here, and just with all the traffic of people to the center, it would probably really disrupt the work we do out there, because people will be in the lanes, whether they're or at the nets, whether you're operating them or not. Then a big part of is to do migration counting. So you're out there and people distract as you're trying to hear things sing and stuff like that. So, I mean, there's still a lot of visitors at the observatory, but it's a little bit less. It's more manageable.
Right.
And I think that's the one nice thing, because when I started here in 2004, the center was still very much of an idea. Right?
Yeah.
And so we would just get, and I mean, we had some support from the park's interpreters, but yeah, we would just get hit with people sometime. And like you have birds everywhere, people everywhere. You didn't know what to do. So the nice thing about having the association with the Boreal Center is you have interpreters and educators that can come out, and we can do our thing, they can do their thing, and everybody, all the visitors get a much better experience because they have that, direct contact with somebody who's not trying to do something else while fielding questions and whatnot. And while the people doing the monitoring can focus on the birds, which is their job.
Yeah, exactly. No, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, you don't want that because just the idea of having, you're trying to do 3 jobs at once type thing.
Oh, yeah. The one time we got, this was in the early fall when we were running 2 programs, our busiest time of year. And basically the group use campground all came to visit. So there's about 30, 40 people, and we got hit with birds because we're running 2 programs. So both sites got hit at the same time. So
and how many people are banding?
There's only 2 of us. And we're dealing with hundreds of birds and people just everywhere. And it was a nightmare.
Yeah. And then they're probably getting angry with you that you're not helping them and paying attention. You're here to be, and it's I'm here to do the science part, and I'm not the educator.
Yeah, and especially when you're dealing with birds, because I mean you're dealing with little lives here, so they have to. I mean, they're pretty safe. We wouldn't do it if the bird safety, of course, was our most important thing. But still, you want your attention on what you're doing instead of just trying distracted. Yeah,
for sure. So what's I wanted to get into the bird banding process and why why do we? First of all, let's just start off. How do you band birds? And then we'll get into.
What are you doing, Rich?
Yeah, what are you doing?
Well, actually, we'll go back to the other question. Trying to get the whole picture.
Yeah.
Because banding birds is just one of the methods to get our bigger picture. So I'll just go back to what the big picture is.
Let's do it.
So what we're trying to do is we're monitoring bird populations from a fixed point, migration monitoring.
Yeah.
Because a lot of bird monitoring projects, there's all sorts of them, whether they're point counts or transects or you name it, there's all sorts. And all of them have specific goals.
Right.
All of them have their strengths and weaknesses on what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
And the purpose of migration monitoring is you're at a fixed point and you're just letting the birds come to you.
Right.
And you count them as they go by and fly past. And
you have a specific a corridor that is a migration corridor for some of these birds. I'm assuming, right?
And most migration monitoring stations, because there's about 25 or 30 in Canada,
just over 25,
and they're usually set up around some geographical obstacle that either concentrates birds or that concentrates birds.
Right.
And in theory, you're supposed to get those numbers every year, because the birds are going to stay and fly in the same area.
Right.
So I mean, that's why the Great Lakes, they're just littered with monitoring stations, because after the birds fly over the Great Lakes, they have to stop and rest.
Right.
And so that's why you hear the big terms of fallout and stuff like that, because if the birds are flying over the lake and they hit bad weather, they're exhausted and they all just come not crashing down, but
they need
they need to rest.
Yeah.
And so here at Lesser Slave Lake, we got this huge lake and we got Martin Mountain. So basically the birds don't want to fly over the lake. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, the lake isn't that big, because I mean, some of these birds fly over oceans, Gulf of Mexico.
Could totally fly over it.
They can totally, and I'm sure they do. However, if you can avoid it, why take the chance? Because they're more exposed, there's predators and all that fun stuff.
Well, it's the same thing with even helicopters don't really fly over the Slave Lake because it's just a safety concern, right? If you do have to land, you can't land in the water, right?
Yeah.
So I mentioned birds have the same problem, right? They don't want to land in the water if something does go wrong, whatever, right?
Absolutely. And so they're trying to fly around the lake, skirt around the side of the lake, and so we're set up right on the lake shore.
Yeah.
And so one of the important things is, so basically we're trying to get an idea of the populations that are coming. It's long-term monitoring, and long-term monitoring is very important because a lot of the bird populations are cyclical in a sense. So you'll get fluxes, if you will. I think whether it's related to food sources, I think Tennessee warblers are really associated with spruce bloodworm. So you get a big outbreak. So you'll have a couple of years where there's Tennessee warblers numbers huge, and then it balances out and they drop
because they're eating the spruce bloodworm.
Yeah, and so it's a couple very productive years where they can just reproduce like crazy because there's food everywhere.
Right.
And so, but if you only have 2 or 3 years, so you can either see the peak of that and then the drop, and you're like, oh my goodness, Tennessee warblers are now going to become extinct.
Yeah.
Or if you go the other way, like a couple low years, and then you hit their peak with the productivity peak, and suddenly you're like, oh yeah, Tennessee warblers are fine.
Yeah.
So you need that long term to see what the long term trend is.
Yeah, a snapshot in time can be dangerous, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
And that's one of the big problems with a lot of projects is because funders want to see short-term results. Like, we'll give you money for a year or two, go do your thing. But for some cases that's fine, but for some you need 5-10 years. I know for acceptance into the Canadian Migration Monitoring Network, for your station to be accepted, you need at least 5 years of data.
Oh, okay.
They won't look at you. They won't look at your data until it's at least 5 years.
Yeah.
Same with our breeding program. You need at least 5 years before they'll even say, okay, we can start getting some trends out of it.
And they really need 10 years for any kind of
Right.
So an active trend,
Yeah.
And so that's the purpose of it. And we just did our 25th year, so we have a really good basis of that thing. Yeah. So we're all over the place on we haven't got to bird banding yet.
That's okay. We're narrowing in on it, right?
Yeah.
This is the big question that I wanted to. Why are we doing this? Why is it important? How do we do it?
Yeah. So generally, so we want to see what the populations are. So you want to keep things standardized as well. So you want to. There's so many variables with dealing with wildlife. A couple days of bad weather can, you can't do adequate monitoring when it's super windy, or and so there's a lot of things. But you want to try to keep things as close as you can to have comparable data from year to year, so you can get your accurate trends. So we operate the same time of year, the same location. We do the same counts. We try to do everything at the same time of day. We start at the same time throughout the season.
And that's early, right?
Yeah.
So yes,
we
very
basically
early.
So we start we run spring migration from mid to late April, depending on what's going on, how much snow there is to shovel, and if they've until June 10th, and then we switch to fall migration from mid-July to the end of September.
Gotcha.
And then every day we start a half hour before sunrise. So at April 15th, that's nice. I don't know, 6:30, 7 o'clock. But on July or June 10th, you're now at you have to be there at 4:30 in the morning. So it get pretty. But on the other hand, then you're done at 11:30. So you come into the office, you do your paperwork, and you're like, bye. And everybody else is like, oh, and it's a nice sunny day, so you just go to the beach. But then the joke's on you, because then you have to go to bed at 7 o'clock while everybody else has their campfires and stuff. So
I had a conversation with my wife on the way up here, and she's just like, I don't know if I could get up at 3 a.m. to I don't understand how that's feasible. I go to bed at 6. It's the same amount of time.
You definitely have to like mornings.
Yeah. And it gets harder sometimes. Over time, it gets harder. Anyway, and so that we also have, so we keep everything the same. Try to do that. And our focus we count while we're out there, we keep track of everything we see in here, all the bird species.
Also, not just the ones that you're catching, actually.
Everything. Because the birds are actively migrating. And so a lot of times, because we're not a stopover site, because when I referred earlier to the Great Lakes stations, they really do a lot of banding is a huge part, because the birds land because they're considered a stopover site. because they're landing to rest.
They're
Tired, yeah.
And they're foraging.
And they're foraging and things like that. Where here, they're just bypassing. So actually banding only accounts for less than 10% of all the birds we encounter. Oh, okay. And we encounter, 100,000-ish birds in a season.
Right.
So quite a few. So just to give you, those numbers aren't.
That's a lot. Though,
anyway, it's a lot. So, so we have to spend a lot of time watching the birds and accounting for them. Yeah. So we deal with everything. We count the songbirds are our primary focus, but we'll count the eagles, the hawks, the geese, everything we see in here. And so while we're out there, we have standardized counts, and we have 4 things that we do. So the first one is we run a census. So basically we walk through the entire station area and just keep track of everything we see. And it's only done once a day, and it's about a half-hour walk. So you take a walk down the path, and just give you an idea of what's going on in the area.
And you're just writing this stuff down.
Yeah. We just write it all down.
Like a spreadsheet or something.
Yeah. Back of a piece of paper, actually.
Whatever.
Literally.
Got a napkin from the dinner night before.
Done it. Yeah, I've done worse. and because we're dealing with actively migrating birds, we have and to get you out counting, we have every hour for 5 minutes, we have visual migration counts. So you stand in the parking lot and you just for 5 minutes dedicate yourself to everything that's flying overhead.
Gotcha.
And sometimes, you're counting 2-3 birds, sometimes nothing. Sometimes you can have 5,000 to 10,000 birds in 5 minutes. Exactly.
Yeah.
You're just like, I don't know. And they're high. These guys are well above the trees. They're like...
And you're talking little like songbirds and stuff, all the way up to
sparrows,
ravens and whatever.
And I'm always amazed where, I'm looking up and they're just these little dots chipping and chirping, and they'll know exactly, most times they'll know exactly what species it is going by. And I'm always amazed.
Yeah. And you do the best you can. Sometimes you can't get...
Do you video it ever? Like video it and try to like maybe do some analysis on it?
No, you wouldn't be able to do that. It's too fast.
Yeah.
And
that's what you pay the summer students for.
Your job is sit out there with a camera for 8 hours. Like this.
We were doing a video project last summer, and the guys were trying to video that effect, but it was...
It's just too much.
You couldn't
imagine
what's
5,000 to 10,000 in... Or whatever, like 1,000.
Just imagine just 10,000 dots flying overhead.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
against the sky, yeah.
And you think that's all like it's just like one big like what do you call that? A murmuration or whatever, just going through or
murmuration.
I don't know what the heck.
I don't know what that is either.
Someone say
starlings.
I think. Oh yeah, it was
starlings.
Yeah.
Starlings have the murmuration that looks like you know what I mean? They're like looks like its own organism in the sky that's moving and shaping, but whatever you just call it a flock, I guess.
They're
they're all going one direction.
Yeah, and they're all flying. And you see that a lot more in the spring, especially after a couple days of poor weather, because during bad weather, whether it's raining or really windy or even snowing, the birds won't migrate because it's all about energy efficiency. Yeah. So if there's something that's hampering them to be able to fly, they'll sit tight.
Gotcha.
And then they'll sit around and forage and stuff like that. And soon as the weather improves, they boogie. So if you have 2 days of rain, especially during those peak migration periods, like for up here mid-May-ish, that the first day of sun you're going to be busy.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting is birds actually do most of their migration at night. So we're actually seeing in the morning that it's sort of this delayed, we're kind of figuring the lazy ones. Yeah. I don't, and that's something I never really knew how to explain. Birds do their migration, but then you got 10,000 birds moving at 9 a.m. You're like, shouldn't you guys be...
Yeah, what are you guys doing?
But I mean, I think it's just sort of a local movement trying to find food and make a little bit of headway, because that active night migration is way up. That's when you hear the people the pilots see birds at 10,000 feet or whatever. Like they're going way up there. Yeah.
Yeah. Gotcha. So that's like the intercontinental migrations.
Yeah.
Catching the jet stream.
Well, and if you go onto YouTube in the States, they have their weather radar that they can actually see that the birds lifting off at sunset.
Really?
And so if you actually Google those kind of sites, it's amazing with that. You can see the sun goes down and then these birds.
So it looks like a cloud on the radar.
It looks like a cloud.
And that's really interesting, because when radar first started becoming a thing, like, this was, I guess, end of World War II into the Cold War area. So they'd see these shapes form and they couldn't figure out what it was. Because I think they called them like angels in the night or something like that. Because they're just sort of ghost shaped. And the experts running these things, they couldn't figure out. Yeah, no, all it was just flocks of birds. It's really
that's fascinating.
Cool.
Yeah. That's cool that they just come up in that big of numbers that don't, like the radar picks it up.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
That's amazing.
And in Canadian radar, they actually filter that out. You can't get that data, and so the bird conservation groups are really pushing hard to try and get that data out there,
so people can know. Like they'll be asking questions and they'll get interested or whatever. Yeah, no, it is fascinating. I never knew that. That's crazy. That just the idea that something as big as like it's supposed to pick up clouds is picking up like groups of tiny little songbirds.
Well, we went to this one conference at Prince Edward Point. What is that? Lake Ontario. Yeah, Lake Ontario. So this isn't on. Yeah, it's in Ontario. So one of the banding stations there. So it was one of our conferences, and they brought in a lady who had a mobile radars thing, and she was basically hired to go and track birds. So it was just basically this little utility trailer that was just filled with all sorts of, it was like a gigantic command center. And she did work all over the country. Like I know for a while there, because air turbines, wind turbines, big problem for bird collisions. And so she was down in Pincher Creek, just kind of figuring out where, because her radar system was fine-tuned, so it was meant to pick up birds. So she did a demonstration one night, so we're out there, and so she had the thing going. So she invited people into her little command center and whatnot. And at that time, they were catching owls. And so you'd see this little dot come in on the radar screen, and then you hear the little screech of the owl go as it passes by. Yeah, and just a little dot flies by. You're like, this is amazing.
That's cool. It's like a little like a tornado chaser style van.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, the way that technology is developing now to be able to help track birds. Like, I mean, that's a whole discussion in itself, like, because radar was one of the very first ones, but now what they're doing is mind-blowing. And it's necessary too. It really is. But anyway, back to, we haven't got to bird banding yet.
It's all good,
because we're at the
I was thinking of bird banding as more of a method to get into this stuff, but we're already into this stuff.
So we're all already into this stuff. So we're still now talking about like how we're counting our numbers, because we're tracking populations. So every day we have to get there and we have to figure out how many birds of which species are flying through. Yeah. And so like right now, I mean, I talked a lot about how birds, how we're counting the birds. I never said that that's what we're doing. So we're out there, we're counting the birds throughout, we're taking our walk throughout the day. We're counting the birds in the area. We're standing in the parking lot. So we're counting the birds that are flying overhead that aren't through the trees. Yeah. And like I said, that's like 80-90% of the birds we encounter are overhead. And then when we're not doing anything else, we're just sitting around. We still record everything we see if we're not on a dedicated count. Right. So those are the three that we do. Now, the fourth one, bird banding. So
is the one that gets all the public.
So bird banding, as Patti likes to say it, is the sexy.
It's the sexy one.
It's the one that people connect to because they actually can see the bird in hand, and like you show the people the size, like Cape May warbler or an alder flycatcher that's smaller than your hand, weighs 12 grams, and tell them that this bird just came from Colombia. They're like, what? And you're like, yeah, like, and so, so there's a lot more connection. And I think it's a very powerful tool because people because you show people that birds are flying overhead, they're like, as Patti said, like, it doesn't mean anything.
Or you start rattling off stats about whatever. Yeah, people gloss over.
You have to find that connection that really drives home. And people love wildlife. They love animals. Everybody wants to pet the birds. Like, we can't do that. So banding is a really good thing. And it's, even though it accounts for only a small amount of the birds that we encounter throughout the season, it also gives us some of the best information, because then you get into demographics. Yeah,
it's really getting a sample of all those birds moving.
And so you're getting a sample, and so what the demographics allows you to do, pardon me, double pardon me. It can, like, you know, depending on what season, if you're seeing more adults or young or males and females, it can actually put a picture to what the population trends are seeing. So, you know, in the spring, if you're seeing a lot more younger birds and not adult birds, you know that survivorship over the winter was low. So there might be something going on in the wintering grounds. Or, you know, in the fall, if you're seeing all adults and no young, you know, that productivity tanked. So something happened over on the breeding season. So, you know, you can really, you know, and I think that's the thing, is you need to pinpoint where these problems are occurring. The other thing with bird banding is every bird you catch, you attach a little aluminum band that has a unique number on it. So no other bird in North or South America will have this number. So if it's countered again, you can say, okay, this bird was banded or was encountered here on this day, and it traveled this far over this amount of time. And so you can start making those connections, which they call migratory connectivity. So where the bird is coming from in the summer to the winter, and the routes that they're taking. These are some of the initial steps that they took because banding has been around for centuries. And so this gives you an idea of, like, you know, it's the first step in trying to figure out the problem or the picture of where the birds are going and where they're coming from.
But our birds getting recaptured by another station, the odds are very, very low.
So I think, like, the odds of recovering a bird at another location is very small. I think it's like 1 or 2%.
Gotcha.
It's one of those ones, it's like, you know, the more you throw out there, the more something is going to happen. I was trying to figure
it's a quantity over quality.
You know, if you one of those. I had a good example in my head a second ago, but I forgot.
But even if you
coffee hasn't kicked in yet.
It has. I'm wired.
He's doing awesome.
Fantastic.
But even if that bird never gets caught again, you're collecting all that data on its health and you know, breeding status.
That's the part, like the health part. So like when you're banding it, are you guys doing more than just banding it? Or
we're taking like we
because the bands help you identify that individual
bird, so if,
around the world.
So if we see again or somebody else, so that's the first step, and then we also try to figure out the age of the bird, and then we determine if it's a male or female, best to our abilities.
How do you do age?
Best to our ability. Basically, birds will molt. You age a bird by their feathers. Okay. Because birds have molt strategies. And so they'll replace certain feather tracks at certain times of the year. And so you're trying to determine if those are old feathers or new feathers. And there's books published on it. Like
it's a complicated.
It's very technical.
It's very technical. It's the most important part of the banding process. Of course, it has to be the hardest one to do, right? It's very subjective as well. But you're also limited because for songbirds, basically after the first, do you want me to go through the whole thing?
We don't have to go into crazy detail.
But basically after a certain time, because basically for a songbird, they'll retain juvenile feathers for the first year of their life. And then after that period of time, they'll replace all of their feathers. So basically bird's born, it'll fly south. It has juvenile feathers. And juvenile feathers, since the bird is so, after it's born, is putting so much energy into growing and leaving the nest, can't put that quite quality feathers in, like, you can't grow that quality feathers. I mean, they're still perfectly functional.
So it's a little bit too heavy and a little bit too...
But
they got to grow a whole bird in 2 weeks. So typically these little songbirds, so they can't have perfect feathers.
So they're functional, but they wear out faster. And so after a year, you can really see the wear and tear.
Gotcha.
And so when they come back, so this is their first year, and then they breed, they have babies, and the babies leave the nest. And so now the bird's like, finally, I got some time to myself. And so what they do
we make the analogy, it's like the parents go to the spa and have a little me time, look after themselves.
So after the young leave, the parents or that bird now replaces every feather on their body before they commence fall migration. And then, but now they get rid of all those juvenile feathers. So now you only have adult feathers. And then every year after that, they'll just replace adult feathers. And there's no way you can determine an adult feather from an adult feather. So that's one of the limitations to aging birds, is we can only say if it's a bird that's 1 year old or more than 1 year.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's
And
a young bird or an adult.
Okay.
That's
so it's
really all you can tell.
Just a general inquiry, how old, like, say, does like a chickadee get? Like, what's the general lifespan or whatever of a small songbird?
That's a tough
How
question.
old do you think it would grow? How old do you think?
Man, this always throws me off because
Yeah.
like I remember I asked this question about fish one time, and then I found out that like most of the legal fish that like walleye that you catch in Slave Lake are like 7 years old, and I'm like 7 years old. Like I was thinking like a year and a half, 2 years, but so I want to say like 4, 5, 6 years maybe, but is it? I wouldn't be surprised if you're like, no, it's 30 years. Like I know ravens, they can be like. I think they could be
larger birds generally longer lived, and then it also depends on their life history. So if they're short distance migrant, long distance migrant, or a local bird,
like ravens, they
stick around. So they don't have.
There's less risk.
There's
they
less risk.
Around.
Yeah,
they get to be old, right? Like 40.
Oh yeah,
they get up there.
Right?
Right?
Oh, I mean, what is it? One of the albatrosses, I think they had it like 60 or 70 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean. All the eagles you see, the classic black head, white body, opposite way around. So a bald eagle, if you see a bald eagle that has a classic white head, black body, that's at least 5 years old.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they don't get that age until 4 or 5 years old.
Okay. I knew that because we have there's that bald eagle's nest right by my parents' place, right? And I've seen juveniles there. I didn't realize that those could have been like 2, 3, and 4 years old. I just assumed the juveniles were like that year, and the following year they looked like a bald eagle. But okay,
it takes a while.
We get a lot of people see the juveniles flying around and think they're golden eagles.
Yeah,
we get that a lot. Yeah,
right. I still can't. I have a hard time differentiating between like I can tell just by the puffiness that it's a juvenile, but like from flying around, I don't think I could tell you. I don't think I would know. But we have golden eagles. Like there is golden eagles around?
They've shown up, but as Patty said, there's a lot of misidentification. So I mean, no doubt that they've been around.
They have been sighted,
but they're very rare.
I think probably people also probably mistake them for like ospreys or something too, right? Just that weird like mottled or.
I wouldn't doubt it. Yeah. I wouldn't doubt it at all. But for a life's. I will answer your question in a second. We'll get there. All right. So like when we're aging a bird.
Yeah.
So most of the birds we can say are, when we're telling is like, 1 year or older.
Yeah.
But that's when banding comes into play. So, if you have a bird and you put a band on and it shows up 3 years later, you can say, well, this bird's at least 3 years old.
Right.
But now, when I said before that encounters of already banded birds are so low that, your sample size of how long birds live is very, very small. What's really interesting, though, these are birds that are encountered in other areas. Because here at the LSLBO, where we've been banding birds for 25 years, we only have like 3 or 4 recoveries of birds banded by somebody else. But birds will come back to the same breeding location. So our local breeders come back to the same area year after year after year.
They have really high site fidelity.
Yeah.
Like if it worked last year, they'll come back there again.
And so you catch a lot of the same ones that you've banded last year. Or the year
and then you can start seeing some pretty good numbers. Like I always jump to the extremes where we have.
What's the fun number?
Right? Oh yeah, exactly.
That's what people remember.
Every year we'll get a couple birds that are at least 4, 5, 6 years old, and they've been coming back to the same spot, which is amazing since you consider like the distances these guys are going down into South America, and then they're coming back. And as my favorite joke is. Then they're coming back within like 50 meters of where they bred the year before. And my favorite joke is I can't find my car at Walmart. I walk up there like, I was just in there for like 10 minutes. Where's my car? Let alone 10 months. And be like, that tree, that's where I'm coming. But anyway, so every year we start seeing birds that are 4, 5, 6 years old.
Right.
And I think we have the longevity record for mourning warblers now at 9 years.
I think so.
And then we've had a couple that are at least 11.
I think 11s are.
Yeah, my favorite is the little alder flycatcher. I think it was banded here in 99 or 89 as an older bird. So we don't know exactly when it was born, but it showed up like 10 years later. So we know that this bird was at least 11 years old. And these guys, like I said, 12-gram bird, a little bit bigger than a chickadee.
Yeah.
and they spend their winters down somewhere in the southern South America, southern South America, not southern South America, just South America, probably like
ways,
Venezuela, Colombia. I got the map of South America right in front of me, so I've never known these countries' names, so I'm ace in this part of the test. Anyway, and so we figured that this bird had flown over 100,000 kilometers in its life, and the thing about it is we saw it intermediately in between.
First of all, what's the circumference of the Earth?
Yeah.
Yep.
It's like, what is it? I don't even know what it is, but it's not that.
No, it's flown around the Earth a couple times. And so like since we saw it before, it was coming back to the same spot. It loves Slave Lake.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of things you're like, oh, he's checking.
I want
to
Google it. Keep talking.
So those are the things that are just, those facts are just mind blowing, and they're the rarity. So to answer your question about how long birds live, I think pressures of migration for migrants is huge. So a lot of the birds won't make it past their first year. Obviously enough to keep the species alive. So you got at least over 50% survival rate first year. Mm-hmm. Don't quote me on my numbers.
That's
I'm not a statistician.
We use that stat commonly. So about half won't make it back.
Yeah. And so, but after that, so I think a good lifespan for a songbird, 4 or 5 years is really good. Getting very old, but I think your average is probably about 2 to 3.
When you're talking about like a 20-gram bird, it's kind of like, you're like, that's pretty good. No, that's awesome.
Absolutely.
So apparently the Earth is 40,000 kilometers in circumference. So it's gone around the Earth at least twice.
Times.
Like that's, that's insane. But that's there's so many things that the little tangents when you were talking, and I was like, this and this and this.
I mean, and then those aren't even the birds that have like the record migrations.
Right.
There's some.
But your fascination with, how old that bird can live, connecting, when Rich said that powerfulness of having that little bird in your hand, like that's the connection, whether you're talking conservation messages, you've got kids at the banding lab or public there during the summer, is if you can connect them to that bird, and that bird flew this many thousands of kilometers to get here to breed, and he needs the boreal forest or whatever, like that's, and the other kind of sort of thing that always amazes people is you were talking about those juvenile birds that are leaving. Fall migration starts middle of July. By July 12th, we're seeing, starting to see active migration, and it's those juvenile birds that are typically leaving first. So they're heading off on that migration without anyone telling them, they're not following their mom on the way down.
What the hell are they doing? Like, how do they, well, there was that, maybe you guys can explain this better, but there's that, that study that came out where they were talking, but they figured out how birds know direction. They know the cardinal directions, and it's like a protein in the back of their eye or something. Did you read that? No. This was recent. It was a recent study, like maybe 2 years ago.
I'm not aware of it.
But it was something about like there was a protein in the back of their eye that they can somehow detect magnetic fields.
They almost magnetic fields, and almost have an internal compass, and the mystery, like the fact that people are still trying to figure out how birds migrate and how they get from point A to point B and get back to that stand of trees that worked the last time.
It's ridiculous. Well, and I always laugh because like every time I see ducks flying, right, like a mallard or something like that, they look so exhausting. It's just and I'm like, how does that thing go like 10,000 kilometers to like how is that efficient, right? Because they're not efficient flyers, right? But I guess the answer is they get up into the jet stream or something, right? Like I don't know.
Yeah, they have a way, and I mean, I think a lot of the way birds fly also depends on their migration strategy, because ducks don't go very far.
No, so like how far it is like
they need open water.
They need open water. I mean, we got golden eyes. If the river here's open, golden eyes will stick around.
Got a tundra swan that's hanging out right now.
So they just go south until they find open water.
And that's
they only go as far as they have to.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're not completely dumb.
Still, a duck with like that has to give like 3 beats a second to stay in the air, going 1,000 clicks to find open water.
I should actually clarify that a little, because I think that's a little bit misinformed. Because
because
I was about to say that because goldeneye will stick around if they can.
Yeah.
And I think we have to kind of clarify that a little bit, because some bird species are so ingrained in their migratory route, because that makes it sound like, okay, if there's an environmental change, these birds can adapt tickety-boo, right? Whereas a lot of species cannot. It's so, I mean, the migratory patterns have been evolving since beginning of forever, right? Well, after the dinosaurs, but at least up to there, which is a long time. They are little dinosaurs.
Yeah, I was just saying,
for the record.
Technically, those are like the new dinosaurs.
Yeah. So they can't. Change that fast to environmental change. Some species can, some can't. So I think that's very important to keep in mind, especially the neotropical migrants. So the species that are going down to Central and South America, that's ingrained. That will not change.
It's hardwired.
Yeah. And so when we're talking about environmental change, that it's going to change within our lifetimes, if it does. And these birds aren't going to be able to adapt to that.
Right.
So important to keep in mind.
Yes,
for sure. So they're pretty, like you were saying, they come back to the exact, I imagine if they come back to the same, 50 square meter spot every year here and in South America or whatever, I imagine they're probably doing the same thing. So you're talking about, they're very dependent on that very specific area.
Yeah.
So
and I'm not sure if they come back to the same spot on their wintering grounds in South America. I mean, alluded a little bit early about migratory connectivity, because we know that they go down, but what they do during the winter season in Central and South America, we don't really know. Right. And a lot of the banding programs in those areas are still in their infancy. So we are starting to get people to come out and do the work on them. And that's where technology has really helped out. So there are now ways to track individual birds throughout their entire migratory season.
Right. So there must be some radio collars or something on some birds.
Yeah. But the trick was with for large birds, eagles and stuff like that, and swans, there were definitely easier ways to do it because they're bulkier birds and they can handle the weight. Yeah. But for a 10-gram bird, you don't want, if you put something on, they're just going to into the ground. Yeah. Right? And so you can't hamper that. But now with technology becoming as it is, there are ways to do that. I mean, there are still very, very tight restrictions on what you can do for the birds and what you can put on them and stuff like that, which is really important because you don't want to hurt your samples, but it's getting there. Right? Yeah. The stuff that's out there is pretty darn cool.
Well, how small they can get, little chips and stuff now. It's I'm sure they can build something that weighs, as much as a proton. They can just do
you want to talk about some of the geolocators?
I'm not done. I'm not sure if I'm done. Okay. We'll go back to banding.
You can tell what Rich loves.
It's okay.
No. It all spans from that. Yeah. Because it's putting the band on the bird's leg is still the most important thing you can do because it gives you that base information. Yeah. Now, to get my train of thought here, we'll go back to our migration monitoring, right? Because this stuff is all connected. It really is, and that's the thing about it. There's so many different angles and things to work at. It's not a cut and dry answer what we're trying to do, but so. What the banding does, it gives us a little bit more information on the birds, but it also, when we're doing our normal monitoring, it also accounts for birds that you can't see while they're flying, because those are the ones that are flying through the bush. Yeah, because you can't see those. No, and so species that are a little bit more inconspicuous, secretive, our ovenbirds and our swains and stars, we'll only see one or two. You'll hear a couple singing. But they're our top banded species because they're low down and they're always right in our nets. Right. And so it works out well. So, that's the thing is all of our counting methods are complementary and they give you a greater idea of all the birds that are in the area. Yeah. So at the end of the season, we count all the birds we see in here and band every day and we get an idea of what's around. We send that to Bird Studies Canada and they come up with a population trend or the population indice for that year or that season, and then they put it together and they come up with the long-term annual trend.
And what we're really looking for is change over time.
Right. Yeah. Outside of the normal
or at least you get to learn the cyclical. Right. And then and it's nice because we're part of this network, so you can see if changes in Eastern Canada are similar to Western Canada.
Because our trends are only for our station.
Right.
So we can't, sometimes we'll get calls from people. Yeah, we're doing stuff in the tar sands. Well, it's not indicative of that.
Right.
Our trends are what we're seeing at our station.
Yeah, exactly.
Over the past 25 years.
Right.
But what they do is compare all the stations across the Canadian Migration Monitoring Network to see if those trends are consistent one way or the other.
Right.
Then they compare it to other programs that are going, other bird monitoring programs, and then at that point they try and identify, are there any species that are of concern. Or at risk. Yeah.
There was something I was reading, and this might be off topic, but you guys can probably speak to it. It was about using the banding, or maybe it wasn't specifically banding information, but bird population numbers, and they could tell by the recapture or whatever that there was something wrong with like you were saying, they're not getting the young for whatever reason, and that was how they determined what's her face, the woman who wrote Silent Spring.
Oh, is it Stitchbury?
No.
No.
I should know this is.
I know.
Oh no, we all failed the test.
We did fail.
Podcast
Edit
over.
this out.
Yeah. but yeah, like that whole thing, like the idea that they were, by the population studies, they were able to tell that the young weren't happening, and by that they were able to deduce that pesticides were having an impact on the egg integrity or whatever.
Well,
right?
and one of the things is, we've got a trend. We're seeing a change in a particular species, but we don't know where that species is, where it's breeding. So that's a lot of the work that we do, whether it's with technology or isotopes or whatever. You're trying to figure out where are those birds coming from that we're monitoring. So if there is a change upwards, downwards, whatever, and we're wanting to try and manage,
what that is.
Land managers are trying to work for those species, come up with conservation plans. You need to know where are they. Yeah. And so that's where all that technology comes in. Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to know, and you have to ask someone with the federal government or something, I guess, who's pooling all this information, how they utilize it, and if they've deduced any weird, circumstantial problems with bird populations because of some, an impact we're having or whatever, right? That'd be an interesting, that's just an interesting question that I have, but.
Okay, first of all, Rachel Carson.
There you go.
Silent Spring, very important. And then I kind of missed your whole. I was too busy Googling. I missed your whole thing. But you're basically you're saying that what they do with the data.
Yeah.
And because our banding data all goes to Canadian Wildlife Service, which is shared
Environment
with
Canada and Climate Change now,
which is shared with the U.S. one. So. All the banding data itself is in one place.
That's
and
good,
they do work with that.
That's awesome.
And then all of our monitoring data goes to Bird Studies Canada, and that's all all the stations and across Canada. But what's really nice to have all your data in one central place is then they have the partnerships with the other international programs like Partners in Flight and stuff like that are doing these broader scale environmental population trying to figure out things.
We're technical term.
Very technical.
And that I think that's important, because if we have all of our data in house and we'll write up our little annual report, it would probably go to our readership and that's all. It won't grow into something greater.
Right.
And then I know that when Environment Canada, they do their species evaluations, they take the data from all sources they can find. Yeah. Like whether it's from Bird Studies Canada, Partners in Flight and stuff like that, and the banding data. And they all put that into their consideration, whether a species is in danger or, what their trend is showing.
Right.
Well,
that's like you were saying, right? Doing the short term doesn't make any difference. You need to be doing it long term in 25 years. And if you can get the long-term picture from all over North America or whatever, right? Then it's only going to be better.
But the one of the thing is trying to figure out, when you have your trend, your long-term trend, and that whether it's species X is increasing, decreasing. The next thing is identifying why.
Yeah.
And we touched upon it earlier about the whole demographic stuff, and that kind of tells you a little bit about it, but you got to consider these birds, they don't they're going so far, they don't care about borders or treaties or Trump. Oops, so we're not political.
His name gets dropped almost every single episode.
Every podcast.
And often it's by me, and I don't intend that, but it's like, the analogies are so perfect that it's just like, I got to go with it.
And the thing about it is that, and we'll come back to banding here. we are. But, and so, what you're trying to do is figure out, and that's where you need to figure out where these birds are going. You need to figure out their migratory connectivity, because the threats to bird populations are everywhere. They're on the breeding grounds, they're on the wintering grounds, they're on stopover sites. Like, there's no safe place for species, and all of them are contributing to these declines. So you have to figure out what is hitting these birds the most, and you find the most cost-effective way to try to stabilize the populations and hopefully reverse the declines if you find them. And so, but if you find a decline that's occurring in Colombia, you're like, well, how do we do that? Because the Colombian government, we're up here in Canada, that's the challenge. But you have to figure out where these birds are going.
Right.
And we got, Canada is kind of a large place too. It's kind of a big deal.
You don't say.
And so one thing you find when you're looking at, you'll find that populations in Eastern Canada are different than Western Canada.
Right.
And so that automatically you're kind of thinking, well, these birds that are in Eastern Canada, I mean, these are for the long, like, the widespread, with the widespread ranges.
Yeah.
So you got to figure out, why are the species out east declining more than out west?
Right.
And so that has to do with where their routes they're taking to go down south. Because, you hear the classic, the migratory corridors.
The same species you're talking about.
Yeah, the same species.
West.
Yeah. So, you got your migratory corridors. So, you got your Pacific, your Mississippi, your Atlantic, and stuff like that. But when they go down south into South America, are they staying in a certain area? Are they intermingling? Are they flying from Brazil to Ecuador and back again?
Cheater, quit looking at the map.
I love it. But and so the thing about banding a bird, like, so one of our birds we band here gets caught somewhere else. Like, we had a red-eyed vireo that hit a window in a hospital in Colombia. A couple, we got a report. It's great. And it was a couple of years later. You're like, fantastic.
But not that the bird died, but
no, it didn't die. The bird flying,
they flew away.
Oh,
they got it, which is really cool. But what does that one point really tell you? It doesn't tell you if that's its final destination. Well, it almost was its final destination. Good thing it wasn't. But what route did it take? How long did it take to get there? Did it stay there the entire winter?
It's just 2 points in time.
Yeah. So what came from point A to point B, and that's it. We had a Swainson's thrush that we banded it in a fall, whatever, and it showed up in Kentucky 2 years later. Which is, don't get me wrong, this stuff is super cool.
Yeah.
But what does it actually tell you? What does it, so the bird was flying through Kentucky.
Yeah. But it's those small snapshots in time over a long period of time that you hope gives you a fuller picture every time you get it.
Oh, absolutely. No. Yeah. Like, it is useful information.
Yeah.
But now that technology is coming, you can track that individual bird's movement.
Right.
And that's important, like, to know that if a bird from Ontario is going down to Brazil, and it's just staying in Brazil and just going straight back and forth. Yeah. Whereas the same species here in Alberta is going down to Ecuador, but not intermingling, it's just going back and forth at Ecuador. Then you can start seeing that, there's something in Brazil or something in Ontario that's going on that's not occurring in Western Canada.
Right.
So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm pointing a picture of the connectivity.
Yeah.
And so then you get this other technology that's coming in, and then there's a lot of it now, because I know Patti touched upon the isotopes, where you're actually using chemicals in birds' feathers themselves to actually figure out where that feather was developed.
Oh, so basically where that juvenile bird, where it was born, where it grew those feathers initially, or where they might have molted. It gives you a better idea of where those birds came from.
Oh, okay. So it's like you're doing a drug test in someone's hair.
Almost, very similar. Yeah,
right. Tells you what they ate and where they.
It's
still
tell
exactly where that bird smoked its joint. It is right up there.
So it helps narrow it down. So instead of somewhere across the Boreal, it was the Yukon or Alaska. So it'll narrow it down a bit, but it's still pretty broad scale.
Yeah, it's not very precise. For isotopes, where it's basically. There's a lot of chemicals that they use, but for basically they just use the concentration of hydrogen in the bird's feathers. And so they've developed a isoscape here in North America. And if you're in that certain isobar, that's kind of the range where the bird was developed or produced or born, whatever. But like Patti said, these are huge areas. You're talking within hundreds of kilometers.
Right.
But it gives you an idea of where it goes. And so for that, we know there's a big study that went on here a few years ago that, and so we collected feathers from a whole bunch of species. It was done all across Canada just to see where the migration monitoring stations where the birds were produced.
Yeah.
And so we found that most of ours are actually from northern Alberta into the Yukon. So that's our catchment area.
Huh.
So now we know that, okay, if we start seeing productivity, our area of concern is
that's where you need to work.
North, never east, soggy, northwest of us. I use the map for that too, right? But anyway, and so, that's really cool information.
That is cool, yeah.
And that's part of the value of the Canadian Migration Monitoring Network is, okay, our station here, we're monitoring birds across a broad range of, Northwest America.
Yeah.
That, where there is limited capacity to actually monitor them on the breeding ground. So it's a cost-effective way to get a feel for how different populations are doing.
For sure. So. Well, yeah, once you narrow down kind of the range that they're traveling, where you need to focus if there's a problem, right?
Yeah.
So it's, So can you guys...
sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, so segueing, isotopes are really broad scale. And we talked before about how we can have species that can have big declines in Eastern Canada. And so one of the prime example, or one of the species that we've been working on here is the Canada warbler. Yeah. So years ago, Rich was much more familiar than I am, but we identified that the Canada warbler was a bird that there was a real gap.
Lost my mic stand.
There was a gap in knowledge about what these birds needed on the breeding grounds. They were identified as a species. They are a species at risk in Canada now. They're listed as threatened. And so I'll segue to Rich. Or not.
I'm still waiting for your point.
So we've been doing a lot of field work on whether we're using radio transmitters that was an original project that we did where we were looking at, trying to identify where the territories were for these breed. Because to back up, as Rich has been doing, to back up in Eastern Canada, there is like an 80% decline in Canada warblers. They're taking a major hit. But here in Lesser Slave Lake Provincial Park, they're everywhere. Like I can go outside and hear Canada warblers sing, if I could try and remember their songs.
Elsa, you whistle it for me.
But I mean, we have really, really good breeding populations in the park.
They are, for the record, they are declining here too.
Yes.
So it's not like we're safe
no.
or anything. But it's not as a pronounced decline as they are out east.
But what it has done is because we have these breeding populations here, we've been able to kind of work on some different research projects and collaborative projects with different academics because we can get good sample sizes for different projects. So we had one where it was just our own bird observatory project where we put radio transmitters on some territorial males and we're basically just tracking where their territory was and then going in and doing vegetation studies to try and figure out, okay, what is it that makes that the right territory for them. So what is it about habitat? Or we were looking at what there was for we had insect traps and looking at prey. And so it was a huge,
that's the type of information that I love. Cause that's the idea. Like, well, with my job, like I create inventory maps for forestry companies. Right. Mm-hmm. So, but we've gotten down to the eco phase portion of it where we're identifying, the shrubs that are under there based off of the, like ecosite based off the nutrient and the nutrient and the moisture regime and the vegetation above, right? And from there, I felt like you could identify habitat for each individual species if you knew exactly what that habitat was, right? So you'd think that if you can identify exactly the type of, habitat that those birds need, then you can give that information to forest managers and stuff like that, and they can adjust course accordingly, right?
Well, and that's exactly why we were doing it. Because we did while we're doing the study, we did counts throughout the park, and so we got a broad habitat assessment. So basically, your forest cover type and your height and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And then we went in later once we determined the territories to get the fine scale stuff. So exactly how many trees, how big was each tree, what was your shrub layer, what was your ground like? Because Canada warblers, awesome. Yeah, I mean Canada warblers, and you have to take into account like the species, once again, life history, where do they nest and stuff like that? Because Canada warblers are actually ground nesting species.
Oh, okay.
And so, what makes that ground level really good for a Canada warbler? Because I don't know a lot about inventory, like, the satellites and how they get idea
inventory.
Of like inventory and stuff like that. But I know so we can, I know we can get a very good idea of the cover types and ages and stuff like that. But once you said like, what's that shrub layer doing? That's so important. And what's the relationship between that shrub layer and the canopy type and canopy cover? That's really important.
And it's gotten really good. Like I could say now that from like aerial photography and good LiDAR, you can figure out what that shrub layer is based off of, you can assume. I'm not saying you can see like, oh yes, like that's alder. Like you could assume, right? But you assume based off the ecosite, and it's gotten really, really close. So knowing that we can do that, and then if you can actually sort out for each individual species, and I don't know how many species of birds there are, right? But like whatever, then you know what you need to worry about, right?
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing is because for Canada warblers, Canada warblers have a huge geographic range. They're from Alberta, they dip a little bit into northern BC, all the way to the east coast. So huge breeding range. 80% of the range is in Canada. But we had, so we had a good idea here out west what the broad canopy type was. They like older forests.
Yeah.
But trying to find the association between the shrub layer, because some of our friends were working on it a little bit west of here. So they're doing habitat studies, and they're like, hey, yeah, we have Canada warblers here, but you cross over Peace River or whatever it was, exact same habitat, but no Canada warblers.
Yeah.
There was like this line in the sand where suddenly they weren't there. So what made that important, and what's, you know what I mean? It's, there's still a lot of questions.
We got to figure out we need a Dr. Doolittle. Talk to animals. Just get the answer straight from the source, right? So do we know what happened with or are you still trying to sort out why it's an 80% decline?
Oh, it's all, well, I wouldn't say it's all. Most of it is attributed to habitat loss on the wintering ground. There's a lot of work being done right now, and I've been kind of out of the loop the last couple of years, so I don't really know the direction. But they like spend the winter down in the mid altitudes of the Andes through Colombia, Ecuador, Brazil. They found a lot of that are in Venezuela as well, so they're not restricted to that. But that's some of the most deforested areas in the area. And I think, it's less than like 10% remaining. It's all for drugs and coffee.
Yeah.
So you're drinking shade-grown coffee here.
Yeah. It's really important. And so, but that's not like all the species that use that habitat are in trouble. It's not exclusively Canada warblers. And shade-grown coffee does make a difference.
But it's fascinating to note that it's like with these bird populations, like it is a global problem.
It
right?
is.
Yeah.
It's not like, well, we're doing everything we can here in Canada and the States to make sure that these habitats are intact and they're protected. But like if they're not doing their due diligence down south, then we're kind of screwed.
Well, everybody has to do. You can't pass the buck either. You can't say, well, that's Ecuador's doing it. Like, so
no.
if the problem's in Ecuador, what do we care? Like, we can still do whatever we want. You still have to have the responsibility up here, down there, and in between.
Well, and they have and that's the thing, right? Then you get into politics, and it's like, well, we've got like a developing country versus a like first world country. It's like you can't really tell them like you need to give a shit about the songbirds when they're trying to just feed their
family.
Yeah, it's like so. It's,
exactly. But then you have to find that incentive to do it, because I think, and I think they're doing it right in some areas, like because Costa Rica is a huge place for birds, right? And tourism is apparently great. Like I don't know exactly if it's like the prime example of like, I'm sure there's issues there, but they've really taken into the tourism and, so there's ways around it. I mean, you can't have a perfect system. There's no doubt about it, but you can embrace this stuff and make money off of it. But like you said, you can't tell someone you can't do that because you have a family to feed. So it's not an easy thing to do.
Well, when you were saying it was international, so the Canada warbler, they're working on a conservation plan for them. So there's two big working groups, one in North America looking at the breeding grounds, another one in Spanish looking at the wintering grounds. Because, these songbirds have such a complex life history, there isn't one answer.
Right. Kind of like people. You know what I mean? There's a million different ways to do
There's a million different things affecting them. Yeah. So, just trying to identify, so what are the threats that are happening across there, from South America up here? It's a huge task. They've been working for the past year on it.
Oh, yeah.
So
no, I can't even imagine. Well, you guys are still just, you were telling me the probability of just recapturing bird that's banded here somewhere else. It's like, well, how do you, like that's, it's crazy complicated. Yeah, it's wild. So you said in Canada, there's like 25 banding stations, and then you said down south, down south, like down in South America, they're not as abundant.
Canada we have a formalized network, which is actually very different than the States. They don't have the equivalent. So in Canada, we've got the Migration Monitoring Network. It's an organization. We have shared data. It's much more structured. Yeah. Obviously in South America, they just don't have the capacity to be able to support. Even up here, the LSLBO, we're an anomaly. Most stations don't have a nice education research center like this. Most of them are pure volunteer driven, small little stations. So
kind of spoiled here.
We are very lucky here. We are very lucky. So, but what's happening is a lot of the North American stations are setting up projects in Central and South America. So they're sending down banders in the winter, which is obviously not a prime banding time up here.
Right.
So they're setting up these satellite projects to try and get that data on the wintering grounds, trying to fill in those gaps.
That's cool. So there's people that are banding year round then. They're just kind of jumping.
There is the opportunity. If you got your passport and a banding
and that's what's really neat is that these whether it's like, or, we also have like researchers like through universities and stuff going down there, but they're teaching people, the population, about the value of the conservation and also how to do these techniques. So they're sharing the knowledge and the equipment and stuff like that. So
training them up on
them. And so they're getting, it's expanding down there. So you're finding those people who are really interested to help out with the research projects there as well.
Oh, for sure.
I know the Calgary Bird Banding Society was doing quite a few different projects, but you run into that political instability down in some of these countries where all of a sudden, drug lords have taken over. And so it's not easy.
Yeah. One guy was saying he was down there doing work and over one night a firefight occurred. People they're hiding in their tents while people are shooting over their heads.
Oh my god.
And I can't remember, I'm using my map but I can't remember actually that. It doesn't really matter. So
somewhere unstable.
So like it definitely
makes doing science difficult when you're still trying to work on basic human rights.
Absolutely.
When it comes to environmental integrity and that kind of stuff,
it definitely takes the back burner, and
and you can't blame people, right?
Oh no, not at all.
Unfortunately, it's just that's just the truth of the matter.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've done well over an hour.
You're gonna have to do some editing.
No, I won't do that much. I'll clip whatever. We'll figure it out.
There's still more about banding though, haven't
I know. There's so much. One thing.
And we haven't even talked about education.
We haven't even talked about geolocators yet.
Yeah, that's true.
But but the main purpose of this location here was educating the public and getting people involved, right? Like that was the big piece.
Is I always say that you can be doing all the research in isolation that you want, but if you're not getting that message out, that information out, if you're not getting people engaged in your programs and caring about those songbirds, like you're just doing it for yourself at that point.
And they're fascinating, like you were saying, right? Like it's absolutely fascinating, but most people don't see that connection. They just see like they just hear the birds going over and nobody clues into the complex reality that is there every day, right? It's just
that's the thing. You need to, like, whether it's the public, the politicians, or the industry leaders, you need them to give a shit.
Yes, and you need them to care.
You need them to care, and so you need to find that connection.
Yeah,
and that's the only way you'll do it, just for them to say. And I think we've been lucky here that we've had some of our local government people who've been really invested in the center and supporting
forest industry
who have supported it, and really they see the value in having this, and hopefully that goes into their decision making. And I mean, I know there's limitations because they have to do so many things, but hopefully that's in the back of their mind when they're trying to do that. And when we're talking about things, like my favorite part about working at the center is during the school trips where you get the grade 1s to the high school kids come in, because those kids, you're making an impact on what they see. They're at that age where you
don't know what they're going to pick up and carry for the rest of their life.
Exactly. I remember one day
they're the future decision makers out there.
We had a tour, and then later on that day I was walking across town, and I was walking past the school, and some little kid was walking with his mom, and he was telling his mom about the tour that day. And I was like, wow, that's awesome.
Oh yeah.
But what's fascinating, really cool is when you get the high school kids come in, because high school kids, they're way too cool for that. I mean, and they're all like, they there's other, and I recall. I was there too. Yeah. And so you do your spiel, but then there's always one or two of those students who are interested, but they're trying not to be, but they are. And so you can identify them pretty quick, and then you sort of give them the information, the little extra special, and those are the ones I think are cool, because, because the young kids, you hope, but those ones are old enough, it is, they're kind of going that direction.
They're trying to pick a career at this point in there.
Yeah,
for sure.
Well, and the center's been here 10 years now, and we're actually starting to get staff, summer staff that are those high school kids that were in that banding lab, So that it's really neat kind of seeing that, the legacy of the center and what we're building here. Yeah. When the center first started, I mean, we were this bird place in a forestry, oil and gas town. And so we had to work really hard on connecting the center to the community. So we have lots of family events, getting those school kids out to the banding lab. Sometimes a lot of our programming isn't necessarily about birds. It's just getting that love of the boreal forest. Because if they care about the forest and what's happening, they're helping to protect that habitat that those birds need. So there's a lot of just general forest ecology that's important for these. And we sort of assume that, all kids are comfortable and, are out there in the forest and understand nature living in northern Alberta, but it's far from the truth.
Oh, for sure. Well, I try to bring my nieces and nephews here every time you guys have something going on, right? And they live here, right? But when they do come here and you guys have a big bin full of water and you just took a scoop of the marsh and you find 400 bugs in that one giant, they're tiny little container. They're kind of fascinated and they love to look at it and they're interested, right? Or you guys have a million different things going on, right? And it is fascinating to see them learn about that kind of stuff when they haven't been exposed to it, right? Yeah, no, it's definitely important for sure. Well, it's the same kind of stuff that the whole reason I'm doing this, right, is just trying to get people to care.
Yeah, exactly.
Just I don't care how you get involved somehow, right? There's so many aspects of it.
And that's the thing, is a lot of the things that we don't think about, that it's important habitat for not only birds, but everything. So you'll be sitting there one day, you're like, oh man, I got this tree in my backyard. It's got, it's dead. It's got a big hole in it and stuff like that. That's actually important bird habitat. So, instead of saying, I'm going to get down this tree because it's ugly, it's in my way, or, when we start telling people about, even, what's around, they might try to keep that, even, if, you know what I mean? If it's not a
habitat is not always, it's not always the beautiful redwood forests on the coast that's we should have everything be beautiful 700-year redwoods, right? It's like, no, we use everything from a desert plain to a marshy area to these new growth aspen stands to the old growth, it's all needs to be utilized. All that is habitat.
You tell people how many birds nest on the ground, like songbirds, and they're like, really? Because you think, well, birds are up nesting on the top of the trees. Why should I worry about the ground? You're like, no, that little warbler, that nests on the ground. And a lot of people they don't understand that. So you can, right away then that when somebody's going through for a hike or, driving their ATV across, they might actually, say, okay, we better stick to the path because there might be nests on the ground there. And
the classic example is Darwin's finches, right? He went through and realized that there's there can be 10 different or 20 different types of finches in the same tree, and they're all nesting in different specific segments of the tree.
Yeah, they all have their niche.
They all have their niche, right? Whether it's the top of the tree or just below the top of the tree or the bottom of the tree or on the ground or in the middle or on the edge of the branches or up against the trunk. And it's fascinating to learn that that's all. It is so complicated, right? They're not just randomly picking a spot. It's very specific.
Going back to the big picture of what we're doing in terms of population trends, and ideally we'd like to see, good diversity, good stable populations, and then that's basically telling us that we have good, stable, diverse habitat. As he drops his mic again.
I'm just going to hold this.
And so, you were saying that, the habitat is more than just for birds. If we've got good, healthy bird populations, it means we've got good, healthy habitats for all wildlife and for us.
I wonder, is it kind of like, do you think that birds are, to use this example, it's a little bit on the nose, canary in a coal mine,
we
right?
use that all the time.
Yeah. So they're kind of the one of the more sensitive species that if you see a problem in birds, that there's likelihood that you might start seeing problems in the future with more or less sensitive, species of whatever, right? True, you think?
Or, yeah.
It's like, I don't know, it's sure. We'll go with
that. Well, I mean, we use that.
What the hell's Christoph talking about now?
Well, we use that analogy because, it's definitely some of the birds have very specific breeding habitats that they require. So if you're seeing a shift in those bird species or a group of birds that maybe they need wetlands, maybe they need old growth forests, maybe they need grasslands.
Right.
We're seeing shifts in those, major changes in those trends. It's telling us there's something happening in the environment that they need.
And it makes you aware of it, so you can start actually tell the right people so the right decisions can be made somewhere.
Exactly.
Yeah. Awesome. Do you guys have any final thoughts, any kind of way that you want to wrap up this process? I always ask people that. Final thoughts. Wrap up.
Well, it's time to wrap up already.
Yeah.
Oh my God, we haven't even started.
I know, that's the problem, right? I'm trying to do this in like an hour and a half, but it seems like that's when you start to get into the good stuff. But
yeah, it's the thing about it. It's complicated.
I was going to say it's
habitat,
complex.
And we can do this again. I'm totally down to do this again.
Just briefly, the habitat, because most bird populations, they're birds in a nutshell, are doing pretty poorly. Of course, you got some species that are faring well. Those ones are more adaptable and things like that. But a lot of species are doing really bad. There's certain groups. You read the literature and you're like, wow, those sharp declines in that amount of time. It's scary.
Yeah.
That we're about to lose. Well, we're not about to lose. Sorry, that's the wrong way to put it. But that
they're at risk.
They're at risk. Our swallows and stuff like that, in the past 5 years have nosedived.
Really?
And so suddenly you're like, oh my goodness, Patti said, the Canada warbler declined 80%. That's within 30 or 40 years. That's within my lifetime. And so, are you going to have enough time to make the changes that are need to be? Because the process is slow.
Yeah.
Because the Canada warblers, they were listed 10 years ago, and they're still working on identifying the problems. They're still working on, how to approach
and I imagine
this. And then,
what they can do.
And they even haven't, they're identifying, they're coming up with their action plans. When I say they, I mean, that's a lot of groups. That's government, that's education, academic, and stuff like that. So big working groups, diverse and nonprofits, and everybody who has a vested in interest is involved in these things. But is there time to do and for the amount of birds that are, and I mean, it's not restricted to birds. This could be to all sorts of things, from fish to mammals, coral reefs, that kind of thing. But for birds, a lot of it is down just to habitat. As you said, these species have their niches. So you remove one of their niche, they can't go somewhere else because somebody else is using that area. And then it's not only that, there's quality of the habitat too, because I referred to the Canada warblers in the Peace River area, which may or may not be right, but around there somewhere there's a line, and somewhere they like this area, but next door they don't like that.
Yeah.
Why? What? And then there's a lot of research being done about sources and sinks. So, you might look at your LiDAR and say, okay, that is perfect habitat. So you have this little patch of forest that is great, picture perfect for Canada warblers. You got your canopy cover, you got your shrub layer. It's awesome. But it might be missing something because, they might be in there, but it might not have the productivity. So they might only raise one young, and so it's what they call a population sink. It attracts the birds, but it doesn't have all the resources required to be productive area. And so, there's a lot of work going on this, especially here in Canada, North America, to see how all the cumulative effects between industry, residential, urban areas, recreation is impacting birds, because all the fragmentation, even, the landscape is changing so fast. So you got a patch of forest one year, and so the next year it's gone because it's turned into somebody's house, backyard, Walmart or something like that. So this bird is coming back to the exact same location. Suddenly it's like, oh, my location is gone, so I'll go over here. But that bird, that area it wants to go to already has a bird. Yeah. And so now you're getting more competition between species.
They get pushed into poorer habitat.
Yeah, they get pushed into poor habitat. So you might, like here in the park, we say, okay, we still have great numbers, but are they still productive? Are there other influences that are going on to say, like, we don't know. And the thing is, there's a lot of research that needs to be done, and it's expensive. It's pricey to get through. And, and so there's still so many, and like I said, that's just here in North America, in Canada, in this park. That doesn't include what's going on everywhere else in the world. And so, but then say you identify the problem. So for Canada, well, I'll pick on something different. So we'll pick on, because this is like, so we'll pick on whatever boreal forest species, like who else is declining or in trouble? Somebody who's old growth. I need an old growth species.
Black-throated green warbler.
Black-throated green warbler. Perfect. So
that was the non-birder that did that one.
I haven't thought about this for a couple months. So, you get the species that require old growth forests, right? For whatever, because for here in North, the most productive forests that hold the highest biodiversity are older, mature, mixed wood forests. Yeah. So you get those practices that limited that structural complexity of the forest. You reduce your biodiversity. The species can use it, right? Right. And then the way that, so you got your old growth species, like our black-throated green, that wants your 80 plus years forests. They're mixed wood forests, by the way. But then that forest gets mowed down for whatever reason. And we'll pick on forestry for a second, because I know this is kind of forestry related. But with forestry rotation, because that's merchantable timber, that's the best stuff, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. But the way the forest rotation goes, the forest will never get past 80 years again. So suddenly all that old growth habitat is getting completely removed. And so where are these birds supposed to go after that? So, these are the hard questions. So what I'm getting back to is, say we identify that to save black-throated green warblers, we need X amount of old growth forest, 100-year plus forest, X amount area at all times. Yeah. Right? Is a forestry company going to hang on to that? Mm-hmm. Is that, you're like, is that going to keep them? Mm-hmm. And I understand the forest perspective. Mm-hmm. I know that they have to do what they have to do. And I'm okay with that. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know. I'll get to that in a second.
Well, they're supposed. Well, there are, as far as, and I can't speak for them. Like, I am a forester, but I'm not directly in the industry part of it, or how they do the planning. I'm kind of pre-planning. Right. But from my understanding is they are supposed to have a maintenance of every, the correct amount of each age class available on the landscape.
Usually
permanently.
there's a certain area of old growth they're supposed to maintain over time.
Right?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, no, I'm just using that example.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
so you pick any industry or you pick any
It's fine to use
urban
that.
area.
Yeah.
And you say, okay, you can't do that because this is part of our thing.
Yep.
Are you going to get complete buy-in
Right.
from whoever's making those decisions? Whether because
Right.
it might cut into their bottom dollar, it might cut into their ability to build a swimming
But
pool.
they need to adapt,
you know?
right? They need to adapt to that. Like the industry needs to adapt to those kind of decisions, right?
Well,
Just
and that's-
because it's the way we did it doesn't mean we should continue to do it that way.
And that's
right?
where
Well,
you
and
need
having
this-
that better inventory that you talk about is going to make it a lot easier for us to be able to translate what habitat needs are into the planning process.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
I was going to
sorry.
say the other challenge is, I mean, typically with forest industry or, a lot of planning, they're focusing on key species to manage around. So whether it's caribou or Canada warbler, they pick certain species.
The charismatic ones, yeah.
Exactly. Or the ones that are like if they protect this one, then it'll protect a
the
suite.
umbrella species.
But I couldn't remember the term. I've been out of forestry for a while. But there's hundreds of other species as well. So, like the fact that it's taken 10 years to come up with a conservation plan for Canada warbler, can you really do that for all the other species out there that we know are going to become species at risk?
Yeah.
So I think
tough.
there's going to have to be that shift in
Yep.
how we manage around these species and how we,
There's
I
a
think you're
shift
right.
on
We
how you
can-
manage the landscape in total.
I think
Yeah.
you're right. Totally.
And like I said, I think it's an important thing that needs to be done. And I think that people are starting to get there, but I think as we get generation,
we can't look at the forest as a crop, right? It has to be looked at as an interactive ecosystem.
It
and
is
we
an
need to-
ecosystem.
Well, it
Yeah,
is,
and
right?
yes.
You need to take it all in order to make the right. It doesn't mean you can't. I mean, we all know that for like trees, for example, are like one of the only truly renewable resources we have. But that being said, you shouldn't allocate every stick of timber in the woods to be cut down at some point, right? It needs to be there needs to be safeguards for other values and everything. So I think you're right. I think as an industry, we start to realize the impacts that we're having, especially with climate change and that kind of stuff, then there's going to be a lot more nuance to how we do this. And it's going to be a lot more careful, and it might not be as lucrative as it once was. Right. So no, for sure. In order to survive, it needs to adapt. And that's the truth.
Well, and there's a lot of interactions that we don't understand yet.
Yeah.
Whether, just between the forest and ourselves,
Yeah.
Forget wildlife as well, that, so we eliminate that. What's the impact on us in an everyday situation?
Totally.
And we don't know. And it could just all backfire and suddenly, and I think that's the way that you have to get these changes is you have to get the personal impact on everybody, how it'll impact you, whether it's, your lifestyle or your wallet or your health.
It's wildly nuanced. It's
Yeah.
all,
Yeah.
but I think it's inevitable that this, I think the forest industry is important and needs to exist. But I also think that we're moving in the right direction towards being more, having more integrity when it comes to environmental sustainability over time. Because I think that's always been the idea. That's always been the intent of the industry. That's always been the way they're trying to do it. But moving closer towards the science and thinking of the forest as a interactive
It's becoming
ecosystem.
incredibly complex.
So complex, and it's become so costly that I don't know. But it's definitely something that needs to happen.
And I'm always I know there's a balance.
Yeah.
Because you need the industry. You need to help the economy. And so there is balance there. I fully believe there is, and it's just trying to find it so both are sustainable.
It's always the problem, right? You can't have the environmental values of economic prosperity. Unfortunately, it's like we were saying before, right? You can't worry about how the birds are doing if you're just worrying about how to feed your family. It's just like they go hand in hand, right?
Well, in the LSLBO, we get great support from local forest industry, and part of that as well is that we're working with them to give them the information and keep birds on the radar and have the
and they need that information, because that's how they're going to keep an eye out on these things while they're out there. Right?
Well, and it's also helping with their best practices as
Exactly,
well,
yeah.
because I'm sorry, this is very broad. But a lot of understanding about critical breeding periods and stuff like that.
Yep.
Because otherwise they wouldn't know.
Yep.
And I don't blame people for not knowing.
No, for
but
sure.
as soon as you start, discovering it yourself, you can share that knowledge.
Yeah, more information, the better.
And as one forester I talked to put it, they want I mean, I don't want to pick on, like, I don't want to make this sound bad. Like, I'm not making forestry an evil thing. It really isn't. It really isn't.
I understand what you're saying, though. It is a balance.
Yeah,
right? Like,
but you know, they want to see.
They want to do a good job.
They want to do a good job. They are stewards just as much as we are too, because they know the long-term sustainability is very important for what they need. But you know, it's those nuances, as you discussed, that they may not be aware of.
Yeah.
We can say that, you know, you have to adjust a little bit over this time period, or you know, this might be a better way to lay out your blocks, or you know, to help.
But you do that by informing people, right?
Yeah. It's communication.
Because like, well, you're a forester, right? And it's like, you didn't get into forestry to, like, you know, because you were bloodthirsty and wanted to cut down trees, right? Like, that's not
at all.
That doesn't exist. You got into it because you love nature.
We love the forest. We love nature.
You want to see it perpetuate, and I'm assuming you probably recognize that this is one way by which you can impact that, right? And that's true.
And you have to identify the problem. And it's not like that. It's the same with oil and gas, the same with agriculture. It's all industry. Yeah. Everybody has issues. Some overlap, but some are very exclusive to what they are. Yeah. And unless, you know, you say these are kind of the threats that you're posing, is there a way to do that? Yeah. Otherwise, you have to educate. And they'll be like, okay, I never thought about it that way. I do that all the time. I never thought about that.
Yeah.
Well, okay, we should shut this down.
Okay, I know. I was in the shower. I'm like, hey, I got to figure. I was trying to figure out, like, how to hit the hard hitting questions.
Those
so
are the ones
why
I
brought
want.
That up.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's been in the back of my mind.
I like it. Those are the ones I tend to ask people too, is because those are the ones I want to talk about, the hard questions and the, you know what I mean, things that are uncomfortable, because that's how you get people actually thinking about this stuff.
Because I mean, we spend half the time, or most of the time, talking about, like, the amazing things that birds do. Yeah. You need to drive it home to say, this is what you need to do to help them out. Like, you know, as an individual, and, you know, your everyday choices. And sure, you might have to give up a little bit of stuff, but in the grand scheme is what you're going to give up.
It'd be interesting to see somebody, and you can tell me if there is this resource out there for, like, a place for forest managers to go to find information regarding, say, like, species at risk that are specific in their area, right? That they can go in and go, okay, these are some of the small things that we can do when we're planning our cut blocks or whatever that might be able to help this, you know, the sustainability of the species. Like, it'd be nice if that was, I'm sure that's a resource that doesn't exist, but it'd be wicked if it did.
There's bits and pieces of it in lots of different places. Right. I would say there's probably not one-stop shopping.
There isn't.
That would have everything.
But I guarantee you that people want to know. People want to hear that, right? They want to know where to find that kind of stuff. But it's
no, actually, that's not a bad idea. Is to have sort of, and I mean, it might be like, I know there's so many different organizations doing things. Because what is it? The Sustainable Forest Initiative, SFI. That's a certification, and I don't know what they do. I'm just pulling. I just know an acronym in the back of my head.
There's a bunch of certifications.
And so how much
and there's lots of different modeling.
And how much they talk with each other, and how much the forestry talks with the different levels of government. You know, because to do your DFMI, you have to talk to the
DFMP.
Sure. Yeah. You have to talk to the you have to consult with the provincial government
and the public
and and stuff like that. Yeah.
It's all very it's a huge plan, right? Yeah. But I think though that just the individuals that are actually out there, like the foresters that are on the ground planning the block, overseeing the harvesting, if you could tell them, like, hey, these are some things to watch out for. They're out there every day, and they can actually they don't have to go to their boss and ask permission to leave a stand of trees standing in the middle that looks like it's really whatever, right? Like, they can help with those decisions, right? Or they can help say, maybe we shouldn't harvest this block at all for this reasons, and they can do that. They can make those decisions at the low level.
Yeah, you know, and I mean, there are...
So you don't need to change the whole industry. You just need to change the minds of the people doing it, right?
The guys on the ground.
Not even change their minds, because their minds are already there. You just have to provide them that information so that they can make that decision.
Yeah, right? And we've done some consulting with forestry on, you know, and that kind of thing, and it's good because you know, they come back every year for the same sort of thing, so you can reinforce that information. And I mean, we only deal with one company, one of the many companies that operate here for that, little consulting stuff. But you know, it's really important.
For sure.
You're talking to somebody at least.
I mean, Rich mentioned the DFMP process. I mean, we are invited to sit in on those kind of discussions, and it's an important hat we wear.
Yeah, detailed forest management plan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Using acronyms.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's an important hat that we wear, that when we're at that table, that we're one of the few groups that's representing,
the birds,
the wildlife, the birds that are out there. And also recognizing that we're sitting here as a nonprofit in that role. So it's always a challenge, whether it's, getting the resources and the funding to be able to support that type of work.
It's just it's because I never look at even like the oil and gas industry and stuff like that. Like I don't look at any industry as like, nobody's out there being like, we should destroy the environment, right? Like nobody thinks that, right? There's ignorance, and then there's realization that like, oh, we could have done this differently, we wouldn't have had this effect, right? But it's the availability of the information that is holding that back, right? So and
that's been partly the value of the center for the LSL, for the Bird Observatory, is it gives us the profile to be able to
do that.
You're here because of the center.
Totally.
If we were just a little banding station, whatever.
Yeah, I'd probably still be here because
probably.
That has to do with.
But it gives you the opportunity to talk to a lot of different people, or we have collaborative research groups that come, that are doing research on all sorts of different birds, and
it gives legitimacy to it. For sure.
It does totally.
Yeah, absolutely. So. Well, thanks a lot for coming on, guys. This is awesome. This is a good conversation. This was definitely the longest podcast.
And we still haven't talked about banding. There's still more.
I know. There's always more. We can do this. Let's do this again some other time.
Okay.
But thanks a lot, guys.